Hey, security pros, welcome to another Hacker News webinar. My name is James Azar. I'm the moderator, host, and a chief information security officer for the Hacker News. Well, I'm not their CISO, but I'm a CISO in general. I should have said that a little bit better. You would think I'd know better after 3 years. But welcome to another Hacker News webinar. We've got our friends from Sentra joining us today. This isn't our normal setting for everyone watching. Unfortunately, we had some issues with our software, so we've had to record today's webinar in Zoom. I do apologize. It's not the same production quality you've come accustomed to from us here at the Hacker News. So accept our apologies. But joining us today, whether by Zoom or traditionally, are a great team talking about an unbelievable problem, securing AI in the age of intelligent agents. Yair Cohen is the co-founder and vice president of product over at Sentra. Yogev Wallach is the AI security product lead over at Sentra. Gentlemen, welcome to the Hacker News webinar series. It's great to have you here both with us.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, Jay.
Well,
It's great to be
I'll
here.
let y'all take it from here, and we'll hopefully we'll get some time for audience questions for everyone tuning in. Audience questions, please put those in the question area. We'll try to get to some of those questions during the webinar, but if we don't, they'll be answered via email after the webinar is over. So go ahead, gents. Floor is all yours.
Great. So we're talking about securing AI in the age of intelligent agents. Basically, agentic AI comes with a huge promise of being able to solve complex problems, help with automation, understand business flows and business contexts, and also help make decisions and even take action. Enterprises gain these following capabilities, which one is enabling access to corporate information and summarizing the enterprise data. You can enhance customer experience by customizing CRM data and customizing the experience of the customers, basically. And the third option is scaling operations without scaling manpower by using automation and agents. Now, in practice, what's happening is that use of AI has become ubiquitous. We see agents, we see MCP servers, we see a whole infrastructure, a kind of internet of agents. They're being used more and more. Their capabilities, like I said, in order to streamline business processes. And AI agents are now actually becoming more autonomous. They're gathering information and sharing it with third parties, even taking action to change data. And these models are using corporate data, whether by training data or augmentation data. And some of this data is sensitive that we feed into the agents, and then the agents themselves become sensitive data assets because they can output this sensitive data to users, or perhaps if they're compromised, to third-party actors. Over to you.
Thanks, Yogev. So we're here to talk about the security around AI. And as we all heard that before, data is practically the fuel of AI, right? And we're here to talk about the risks and how, to secure and adopt AI more securely. And there are like three main risks that we wanted to like talk about and dive in a bit. First is, in order to use AI responsibly, we have to ensure that we're not exposing data within the organizations. And the reason why is the risk, because when we're talking about enterprise AI agents, we're talking about taking like a general knowledge model with an LLM and connecting it to our corporate knowledge bases. Could be our customer data, could be our corporate data. And all of a sudden, these agents can do an incredible job to get to a lot of data that many times we're not supposed, or the employees are asking the agents questions supposed to have access to. Also, like about privacy and compliance, what we're thinking about here is, we've all been securing data for a long time. Our customer data is an example that contains a lot of regulated data. And now where we're having, new AI models, new AI workloads that we're training using training data sets, we're seeing that in recent surveys, more than 90% of the data we have in our enterprise is accessible by AI workloads, which could be pretty scary. And the last is data democratization. And what we mean by that is that since data, especially in the cloud, proliferates and sprawls so fast, it's almost critical to know which data we have in order to ensure that some data has the right safeguards and even restricted from AI. So let's move on and talk about two specific risks in more detail. And the first is about sensitive data exposures. So what we're looking at here is an example of using Microsoft Copilot Studio that allows us to essentially create different Copilot agents within our organization. And as a user, I can connect that agent that comes with a general knowledge model, LLM, to my corporate data or to my customers' data, whether it's on M365, Salesforce, Amazon GCP, or Azure, you name it. And once the user that creates the Copilot agent connects that to a knowledge source, then we might end up in a situation where some employees in my organization who previously did not have access to such sensitive data can access it. In another case, when thinking about Google Gemini or Microsoft Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, those special agents usually respect the permissions and the access controls that each user in the organization have. But the problem is that every organization, every enterprise knows that many permissions are too excessive and are left behind when employees share and collaborate documents between them. And with the Copilot agent, it's basically like a Google search or a super powerful search engine that allows these employees to find any information they have access to, which often they're not meant or supposed to have. So for example, if we're looking at a case where an employee is asking the Copilot agent, find me salary info for executives, I bet that in many organizations, unfortunately, they will find some information that they were not supposed to have access to in the first place. So in short, when connecting Copilot agents to knowledge bases, there's a risk that sensitive data in these knowledge sources will be available through the Copilot agent. And then the Copilot agent exposes its own access controls to employees in the organization, even to third party, could even be published as a website. And we have to ensure that this new attack vector to expose data is being responsibly mitigated. Now let's take a look at the next risk. Here we're talking about compliance and responsible AI. So here we're talking about a slightly different use case where as an enterprise who offers digital services and tries to improve my sales, my customer experience, we're training new AI workloads, new AI models that can offer incredible customer experience or help me increase the productivity of different departments within my organization. So when you look about training new AI workloads, there is a big question of what type of sensitive data is used for training. And in order to use AI more responsibly, we kind of want to ensure that the data that is being used to train the model does not contain any regulated part, such as protected healthcare information. Let me give you an example. If I'm a healthcare company and I want to build an AI workload that will help me diagnose different diseases, I might use some customer data with previous diagnoses. However, to do that responsibly, I must ensure that my company will not train that AI workload using patient information that contains the identifiable part, because I don't need it, right? But if I will accidentally use the protected healthcare information without anonymizing, without redacting or removing the identifiable part, when my end users will ask, how can I safely diagnose diabetes in patients or something else, I might risk leaking patient information that is identifiable. So in short, when we think about compliance risks around data used for AI, we have to ensure that my organization is not using the regulated data, the identifiable information that in 99% of the cases is not really needed to achieve a high quality workload with AI. So, of course, there are many other risks, but we're here also to talk about what you guys should do. And it starts with knowing your data, right? It's still incredible how difficult it has been to kind of get an idea of what data we have. which also changes every day. But that's no longer the case, right? With many modern solutions, such as what Sentra provides, it's no longer difficult to get really good visibility and control of all your sensitive data by discovering it, classifying it based on finding regulated data, based on finding sensitive content in my corporate data. And then we'll also reduce the data footprint. We'll remove a lot of shadow data that we don't need before the AI workloads or the AI copilot agents will find its way there. Once we do that, once we get a good understanding of which data we have, the next is to build a really strong data governance program, right? We might ensure that every piece of data has a label on it, so we can use that labels when, whether it's a data scientist or an employee wants to connect the data to some copilot agents or AI workload. And we also want to assign ownership, right? Ownership and other types of data governance practices, which will dramatically increase our ability to make sure that only the right data goes to AI and ensure that it's being used responsibly. Moving on to controlling access permissions. As we said before, these copilot agents are like super powerful search engines that will find the way into the most sensitive data if the users have permission to it. So the next thing we want to do before we adopt generative AI and copilot agents is to really see and understand which users, which employees, which third parties have access to what data, and remove that permissions we don't really need. Ensure list privileges and remove permissions to very sensitive data that are left behind and that are not really needed. And of course, we want to do it automatically. And lastly, there is another inherent risk in GenAI services, such as copilot agents. And that risk is that when these copilot agents return answers, the user is sending a prompt and the copilot agent sends back a summary. That summary, if it contains sensitive information, is not being controlled through the organization's security tools anymore. And that's why we also want data loss prevention practice here, to ensure that the very sensitive data, the confidential data, the data you do not want to lose control of, will not even be part of the summaries from the copilot agents in the first place. Great. I'll move it back to you, Gav, to show you what Sentra does.
Yep. So I'm going to take you on a tour of the platform and the UI. Basically, this is our AI and ML section, which you can access through the sidebar. Here you can see an overview. You have great observability into your AI agents and AI assets. It's actionable. So you can see the name, you can see the account it came from, you can see the model family, but you can also see the aggregated sensitivity and the data classes that the agent has access to, and in turn exposes onwards. So I can't emphasize this enough. Basically, it's not just about someone saying, give me all this information. Agents are being used to create additional data. For example, write me a blog post about this and this. And they might use this sensitive data in examples. So you might inadvertently be part of sensitive data sprawl. Okay, so this gives good visibility into the knowledge sources and the data classes that are exposed when using this agent. Basically, you can drill down to a certain agent and get a detailed view of that agent. You have in the header, again, information about the agent, you have a description, you have a summary of all the data classes and more properties. And here you have several tabs. This is the summary tab. You have the data tab, which basically shows you all the knowledge sources in detail and the data classes that exist in each knowledge source and that granularity. So you can decide that a certain knowledge source is too sensitive or not needed, and you can reduce exposure that way. And you can also look at who has access to this agent, and you can see the identities, their trust level, and their access to the agent, and also their inherent sensitivity levels. So someone who has access to a lot of sensitive information is less suspicious when accessing a sensitive agent than someone who has no access to sensitive information and all of a sudden gains access to a sensitive agent. So this gives a great overview of all aspects of agent operation. and it's very actionable like the rest of the Sentra platform. Now, let's summarize this. So before we even start using AI and AI agents and generative AI, the first thing we should do is sanitize the environment. Like Yair said, some agents have constrained access, so they inherit the access controls or access roles that the user has. So basically, the user only accesses their own environment. But that environment can contain shadow data. It can contain shares that were historic and not needed anymore. So the first step is to use Sentra to understand which data is exposed in the identities environment and minimize the exposure. The second thing is to actually understand where the sensitive data lies. And the next thing is to enforce least privilege access. We talked about people accessing agents and accessing the information, but basically agents can autonomously access data sources. So this requires some more governance and compliance monitoring. And last but not least, we have the layer of sensitivity labels, especially for Microsoft 365 Copilot, where we have downstream DLP mechanisms that are powered by sensitivity labels that Sentra can apply based on the sensitive data that it discovers and classifies. So for example, you can say that a certain toxic combination of, let's say, first name, last name, social security number, and zip code, assets having all that information will be labeled as highly classified. And you can set a purview DLP policy, Microsoft 365 DLP policy, that restricts the agents from including information from those sensitive data assets in its summaries. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of actual breaches that happen. Okay, so I don't know how many of you heard about the Echo Leak zero click, basically discovered by AIM Labs. It's a very interesting vulnerability. Basically, it included taking over, a Microsoft 365 Copilot, injecting a prompt, instructing it to fetch sensitive information beyond the scope of its regular function, and then to exfiltrate that output onward and out of the organization, all zero click, without clicking. Now, basically, if that sensitive data that the attackers were after would have been labeled with MPIP sensitivity labels, the downstream mechanisms, the DLP for Microsoft 365 Copilot, would have prevented that information from being in the response, in the completion, in the summary of the Copilot, and then it wouldn't be able to be exfiltrated out of it. So it would have thwarted that attack. Now, basically, the Microsoft 365 DLP policies and what Sentra can do is, like I said, first of all, you discover all your data, including shadow data, excessive permissions, and so on. You understand what types of data exist. Not only the sensitivity classes, for example, social security number, but also context, whether it's an employee social security number or a customer social security number, or some personal information from Europe that shouldn't exist in a US server and so on. And you can label that with sensitivity labels, purview sensitivity labels, and apply that at scale automatically with Sentra automation. So it's a one-stop shop. Once you enable that policy in purview, you can do everything with Sentra based on Sentra's best of breed classification. So basically, if that would have been done, the attack would have been thwarted. And how this ties in is that actually the new M365 Copilot DLP policies came after the Echo Leak vulnerability, and because of that. So it, in a way, it helps prevent attacks like this. Question?
Wow, we ran through this.
Yeah, that was faster than I thought.
That was extremely fast, but that's great. Let's get to some questions. I love that. All right. So Let me ask you a few questions here. If you're using Microsoft 365 Copilot, right? What do you need to do in order to ensure that you're actually using it safely and securely?
I'll let Yair take that.
That's a great question, James. The first thing is to really discover and classify all your data. You basically need to know what data you have before you enable those Copilot agents. The second thing is to make sure that the right people have access to data before you enable the Copilots of M365. Just because you don't want employees to have like a super powerful search engine that will find information from data that they really should not have access to. Then the third thing, after you discover the data and eliminate access you don't need, is to label it, right? So you want to automatically label the files in M365 using Microsoft Purview and sensitivity labels. So you can really leverage what your Gav mentioned before. One would be the Microsoft Purview DLP policies for Copilot to restrict sensitive data from being part of the summaries that Copilots return. And second, you'll ensure that some data will not be able to be used by employees because it's super confidential. Those are the steps I would recommend.
So you brought up one of those steps being actually configuring, and classifying your data. That's something that you at Sentra actually do. So how does your platform actually help classify that data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, classifying data with AI provides tremendous results compared to more legacy methods such as regular expressions, patterns, and dictionaries. And at Sentra, we had kind of the privilege to start only a couple of years ago, where we kind of saw the potential of AI and built our classification engine using the most advanced AI models that keep getting better and better. So what it means when it comes to like classifying data and labeling it correctly for adopting AI more securely is a couple of things. First of all, when you look at unstructured data, there is so much context that simple patterns would not understand. Like if you think about a phone number, it could be a business phone number or it could be a personal phone number, right? Both need to be treated differently. Even if it's like just detecting a phone number, you have so many natural languages to support, right? From English, Spanish, and so many more. And what about the ways you can say or express a phone number in a document? You could say something like, call me at the number 12345, or I'm available after 6 p.m. at this number. And just so many ways that like with pattern matching, you have no way to control. And that's why AI is doing such a powerful job in classifying and accurately identifying the sensitive information type. And the second thing is context, right? Because when you need to assess the real sensitivity of data, you need a classification engine that is not just accurate, but also understands my specific organization data. It knows to adapt to my proprietary and unique data types, whether I'm in the law industry or manufacturing or finance or healthcare, and the very particular sub vertical or sub industry within it. And that's, I think, where our classification shines. That's how we build it. The other thing is, of course, scale. When you think about doing what we talked about with AI, all those really advanced technologies at scale of hundreds of petabytes, you need to do it fast. You need to do it in a more cost-efficient way, so it doesn't cost you tens of millions of dollars every year to scan all your data without leaving any blind spots. And Sentra's solution guarantees that the cost of running and classifying all your data is between 2 and 3 orders of magnitude less than other solutions.
So you bring up another very interesting kind of thing here that at least for me is Microsoft Purview, right? And kind of labeling MPIP labeling to Microsoft Purview labeling, like how does that work?
I'd like to talk about that and our classifiers. So basically, I'll take a step back. The basics is the classification. So discovering the data, first of all, of course, and then classification. So first of all, Sentra brings best-of-breed classifiers and classification methods, including name entity recognition and a lot of customization. So in a way similar to Purview, but much more powerful, Sentra allows you to build custom classifiers to define custom named entities and basically create custom tags that understand your data with class detection, for example, phone number or zip code, but also the context. So once we have all that, Sentra's powerful automation enables you to create policies. For example, like I mentioned, you can have a certain toxic combination. So you don't care about zip code, you don't care about maybe even a credit card here and there. But if you have a first name, last name, credit card, and zip code, that's a toxic combination that you really don't want to output from the Microsoft Copilot because
Yeah.
that's identifiable.
Right, right. And I would add to that also that in order to use Microsoft Purview automatic labeling, organizations need the E5 license, the Microsoft E5 license. So for organizations who do not want to upgrade and purchase the more expensive licenses, they could still use Sentra's automated labeling with E3. That's all we need to use the MPAP sensitivity labels and apply them automatically by ourselves. The second thing is, while Microsoft Purview is doing a really good job on M365 services, pretty much any large enterprise have data in many other locations, right? In different cloud providers, in different SaaS applications. And with Sentra, they can get this holistic, this single pane of glass for automatically discovering and labeling their data in all these data sources.
Yeah, and by the way, not only that, Sentra integrates with many types of sensitivity labels. So it's not only M365 and Purview labels, it's a lot of other labels. So like Yair said, Sentra is your one-stop shop under a single pane of glass for all your AI security needs.
Thank you for sharing that. And I guess our final question would probably be more something I think everyone here is excited to hear a little bit more about. But this EcoLeak breach, kind of how do you see the future of AI security following this leak? I'm curious.
Well,
Where are we going?
I think right now the state of security in AI is kind of not mature. It's a bit of a wild west out there, and I think that breaches, hopefully not mega breaches, will cause us to kind of rethink and will be a bit of a rude awakening, just like the Echo leak caused Microsoft to implement DLP processes and OpenAI is starting to implement such processes in its enterprise product. I believe that we'll have much more and much stronger safeguards in terms of data security and data loss protection, not only prompt injection and so on, but really intrinsic mechanisms in the AI agents and in the generative AI that will enforce and help with compliance and data security, basically. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes. This area is going to evolve, and Sentra's on it, leading the way.
Yeah. Anything to add to that?
I mean, I definitely agree with you, Gav. I think we're in a very nascent stage of adopting AI, but I guess when you think about kind of the next phase, I think it's really starting to be around your data security and governance program, because data is the fuel for AI. You need to secure your data, you need to control it. Once you do that, you'll be 100 times safer when you go to use AI. But as you Gav said, I'm sure that we'll discover so many more accolades in the next couple of years, and there will be a lot of advancements and new paradigms that security teams will need to be aware of. But I'm very, very optimistic. I think AI is a great tool for both increasing productivity but also improving our security.
I'll agree. I'll agree with that. I think AI is going to do a lot of those things. I also agree with you, Gav. It's kind of a little bit of the wild, wild west, but everything was when it was first adopted, right? Any new technology we brought in was always the wild, wild west. I think what's as a practitioner, I'll say this. I don't think AI is as bad as a lot of other kind of early adoption of technology. I think the cloud was a wild, wild west for a lot longer than AI ever will be. Does that make sense? Like I remember the early days of cloud where, the best solution for cloud was a WAF. Like think of that for a
Exactly.
second.
Absolutely. And I remember the first days of the cloud, right? Like any regulated industry, any regulated enterprise did not even think for at least a decade to even consider that seriously. But now, as we've seen, that's
But
no,
look at
no,
AI. We're what, a year and a half into the AI really becoming very, very mainstream. What is it, 18 months since Chat GPT really kind of became a household name? Look at Cursor. Cursor is a unicorn with AI code writing, like AI generated code. Windsurf. I mean, you're watching AI, Anthropic, Claude. I mean, it's the adoption is great, but it's good to see. The reason I say all of that is because it's good to see that finally companies are adopting at this. Your company doesn't have to be left behind, is what I'm
correct.
trying to say. That as a practitioner, there are ways out there to help adopt AI into your organization, support the business growth and business objectives while still maintaining the underlying layer of risk appetite, of security, of resiliency that you need as a practitioner. That's the one thing I want to point out here. And then we'll wrap for everyone watching. Like, sorry, we'll geek out. But Yogev, you had one last thing to say.
Yeah, I just want to say AI today is a competitive imperative, right? You need to jump on the bandwagon. But the AI infrastructure, the methods will change and evolve, but at the end of the day, it's a data security and data governance problem, right? You want to guard your sensitive data um, from leakage or from leakage with AI, and we need to keep our eyes on the prize, and that's the data.
Yeah, I completely agree that at the end of the day, um, threat actors have two goals, right? One goal is disruption in order to extort. The other goal is acquiring data that doesn't belong to them in order to sell it, right? Both are financial motives for threat actors. I'm not talking about nation states because I'm sure someone will be like, well, that's not, but let's just focus on those two areas there, right? So you've got to do both.
Yeah.
You've
And
got
by
to
the way,
do both.
disruption doesn't mean just, denial of service or taking it down. It can also be ransomware, as in,
Yeah, that's exactly what
how
I
I
mean.
will expose the information.
I
Yeah.
mean, ransomware, or what we've seen over the last 3 years in Russia and Ukraine with wiper malware. I mean, wiper malware scares me to death, right? The day wiper malware is used on an organization that's not part of a nation state campaign, like what we saw between Russia, Ukraine, or Israel and Iran, um, like the moment that becomes available at an organization, you can imagine the need to build resilient data and understand your data inventory, understand and classify your data assets, build resiliency around that data will be where everyone's going to rush to, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be a really bad day for an organization that falls victim to wiper malware from a criminal gang, not a nation state. Again, I
Yeah.
think there's a difference. You got to weigh that difference.
I think the lines are blurring in a way. I mean, today a lot of organizations are almost nation backed, I think.
Well, agreed, but I think there's a difference between going after a critical utility or government office to erase data as part of wartime disruption to wiping data in order to disrupt a business completely and potentially bankrupt it.
Or financial gain. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can go down that. I mean, geez, let's do another webinar just on that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I
Of
mean,
course.
Sign us up.
so, yeah, I love it. Um, I think we have one more slide with a QR code, do we not, Yogev?
Yes.
Right. So learn more about Sentra. Scan that QR code, please. It'll take you to a website where we'll ask for your credentials and MFA token so that we can hack all of your accounts. But after we do that, we promise we'll give you more information on Sentra. I'm kidding. I'm joking. No one's hacking you. I promise. But Yair, Yogev, thank you so much for coming on the Hacker News webinar. To all of y'all that took time out of your day to be part of this webinar, thank you so much for being part of this amazing community here at the Hacker News. We care about what you want. So if you want to see more topics like this, please let us know by going to the hackernews.com/webinars, and we'll go find the best speakers in the world to bring you the best content in the world, just like you saw right now. Talk about real life challenges for cybersecurity practitioners. On behalf of Yair, Yogev, and the amazing team behind Sentra and the team behind your favorite website, thehackernews.com, thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. And most importantly, y'all, stay cyber safe.